Oh, okay. Here we are back again. Good morning, everybody. We're just gonna. Got my tea right here. Mm.
Friedrich von Hayek,
the greatest age.
how magnificent it must be to witness his ideas validated before the eyes of the world.
If there's a word we love on this channel, it's neoliberalism. It's the ism behind things like why our healthcare sucks, why so many people have shitty jobs working for Uber and DoorDash, why Russia got turbo destroyed in the 90s. It's why The Rock's Twitter bio is founder of stuff. It's a thing that matters a lot, but we've never actually spent the time to unpack what neoliberalism is in depth. And we're not going to start today. Here's someone else doing it for us.
Yeah, I mean, neoliberalism gets used in a number of different ways. So I find, as with many of these sort of ism terms, it's most helpful not to sort of decide this is the only one and true definition,
wait,
but
what?
rather just sort of
No.
have a follow-up question every time someone uses the category.
This is Quinn Slobodian, a professor of international history at Boston University and the author of Crack Up Capitalism, Globalists, and the soon-to-be-released Hayek's Bastards. According to him, there are around 4 definitions.
There's kind of 4 different ways that people tend to use neoliberalism. One of the ways, I think, is to just talk about a kind of a period of global capitalism. So people will be like, when did neoliberalism begin? Was it with, the oil shocks, the closing of the gold window, Reagan and Thatcher, European Union and NAFTA, the unleashing of the tech bubble in the late 90s, or kind of the drive up of stock prices since then? I think personally it's good to sort of drill down from there. First of all, to sort of say, all right, what are the set of policies we would expect to see to identify neoliberalism like in action in that period, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s? And there you'd see things like privatization of state-owned assets becoming private property. You'd see the liberalization, so moves towards free trade and the movement of capital over borders, borders. You would see things like deregulation, standards, expectations on so I think that neoliberalism has a kind of a policy package. A third way they think about it, I think, you get this a lot kind of online, maybe especially, is being neoliberal is like a kind of a way of thinking about yourself as a kind of like a bundle of assets that can be like leveraged and maximized. So this idea of neoliberalism as like an entrepreneurship of the self is a kind of it's a kind of internalized logic of action. The fourth way is to think about it as a kind of pretty discrete intellectual movement that began in the 1930s. They then organized kind of formally in the 1940s something called the More Tolerant Society.
Let's stay on that last one for a minute. This right now is a picture from the founding meeting of the Montpellier Society, an academic group who would develop and advocate this new theory of political economy back in the 40s. These definitions, it was just a couple guys kicking it in Switzerland. Ski Trip made it out the group chat. Let's go, dude. At the head of this organization, you had Friedrich Hayek, an Austrian economist, bringing together a group of mostly academics, journalists, and a few officials to talk about where they wanted to see the world going. And the way they wanted to see the world going was rich people getting richer.
What is sales? Bank balance.
If you want to think about it in terms of how this actually happened, actually do, basically, the list goes. Not reading. Now, why would anyone want the rich to get richer? See, around this time, there was a pretty good contingent of conservative economists who were arriving at a similar conclusion. Post-World War II, politics and capitalism had changed. Instead of kings and presidents quietly letting capitalists run free, you had new, somewhat democratically elected leaders being forced into giving their citizens a say about what countries should do with themselves. Communists and socialists took this concept and ran with it, bringing more of the economy under direct control and planning. Meanwhile, capitalist countries stayed afloat by doing a diluted version of something similar, holding the business owner's hand either by giving workers social services and keeping unemployment low so they wouldn't revolt, a la Keynes in the US, or beating up anyone who wasn't happy, a la Hitler and Mussolini. Now, these conservative economists in the 30s, they could tolerate Hitler and Mussolini for a minute, but they didn't like the Pandora's box that was being opened all over the world when workers and governments started getting directly involved in economic decisions.
You had sort of forms of collectivism, as they saw it, with fascism on the right and socialism and communism on the left. And there was a need to sort of rethink the state to protect the market or else sort of driving the whole economy towards like war, annexation, and in the case of fascism. So neoliberalism at that point was an attempt to sort of say, how can we use this to protect market dynamics instead of
millions of Americans were exposed to the ideas of thinkers like Hayek, neoliberal thinkers who all argue for some version of the following the market is a real thing, completely separate from politics, that produces inequality. That's a good thing. While no market is perfect, these outcomes are inevitable. Pollution, physics. The market is a fact of life, something completely separate from collective human agency. Anytime people want to organize things differently than by letting business owners call the shots, that's something called market intervention. It's bad because there's no way to do that and it doesn't result in what they call tyranny. Essentially, tyranny being business owners not getting to do exactly what they want. These guys don't necessarily think the business owner needs everything perfectly designed, but they do think the business owners trying to achieve that is the only way to organize stuff and produce and distribute. Democracy is, therefore, a huge problem in liberalism. These thinkers quite correctly figured out that since business owners were shots, other people weren't going to be happy for someone else temporarily making in a democratic system, they might start demanding welfare, decent wages, more allowance. They might stop working to get those things. All of that gets in the way of a few people making a quick buck by any means necessary. Instead of democracy, then, these guys started advocating for freedom. Continue without society in any way that that was business owners, all of them, all needed to be protected. People's desire for equality, also meant protecting them from governments, increasingly pressure into not letting them do all that, who had started to show off the fact that even they were capitalists. That doesn't mean that liberals wanted small government. This is important. Unlike earlier liberals, state or the market, neither liberals realized that in order to protect market outcomes from democracy, you needed a new kind of state, a neoliberal state, one that will encase the capitalist economy and protect it from reality. But that wasn't enough. Above the state, they wanted a system of institutions that would make sure countries would keep it in check and never succumb to the institutions which would codify into international law the rights of investors and actually enforce them by punishing countries who didn't put them first.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most common error rhetoric sort of comes up in this idea that neoliberalism rolling back the state only, but also rolling out maybe, for example, people might talk about food but that was also a time where you got literally tens of thousands new bilateral investment treaties, new forms of arbitration, new forms of investor states. So actually what's called free or unfettered trade is actually super thick. Agreements being made. The difference is that there are agreements and laws being made primarily to protect a certain kind of market against
And you can literally see the application of this framework right now.
They were given the right to take kind of patch of territory and have part of Congress, to regulate laws, make their own regulations, have their own courts. It's not under an authoritarian government about 2 years ago. And with the change in government, the new Democrats were in government said, we don't want this. Get out of here, you Silicon Valley. The response of the investors has been to sue
Now that we know what honestly, a lot of things can explain neoliberalism. For governments, neoliberalism was incredibly important in the 70s and 50s. However, that's when Reagan and spiritual children of the Montpelerin Society. More about heritage here if you're interested. Anyway, Reagan is literally handed a checklist on how to do neoliberalism and immediately sets out going down the list, crushing the institutions that make society more equal, fair, and safe, and giving more leeway to companies to screw around, monopolize, and buy state assets for cheap while putting all the government's energy into protecting them from repercussions. And that was allowed to happen partly because the Keynesian alternative of welfare and full employment was weakening.
There was a kind of impasse in the 1970s related to American overspending on things like, especially the overseas commitment, Vietnam War, the effects of the oil crisis, when the cost of oil quadrupled in the early 70s, and thus suddenly made it much harder to keep things like heavy industry functioning in a place like the American Midwest. So there was a kind of a collapse in manufacturing in the US, Germany, a sense of anger, and people felt like their rights as workers that were being mobile and not being political wage strikes, wage strike greatly, but now the
where the wealthy, especially wealthy Westerners, weren't free to do whatever, but actually had to negotiate with institutions that sometimes less power and profits. They couldn't just impose colonialism back on the countries which was free themselves. So liberalism came up with a compromise. They would like the neoliberal foundation. The law is now dominated by the kinds of capitalism neoliberals dreamt up in the 30s and 40s. It's not that everyone's becoming less already in the 90s, as all this is crystallizing, people knew what this project was being and they fought back. Not every politician and even today, explicitly anti-neoliberal, like Scheinbaum in Mexico. But neoliberal thinking has become a baseline against which alternatives now have to be compared. Neoliberals haven't taken over the government, but they do have alternatives. They don't have a secret plan, but they have been putting a lot of effort into getting politicians on their side. Trump being one of them. His biggest accomplishments were a direct product of Reagan's economic advisor, Stephen Miller. His current Treasury Secretary, just a year ago, was writing this in pretty clear terms, saying it was time to make neoliberalism more aggressive. The good thing is that none of this is permanent. While it's not over yet, there is an expiration date. The capital has consumed all its available frontiers, attacked its resources, and is free from the law. The growth oligarchs or their political lackeys are going to make that happen.
Oh my god, what the fuck? Cypher before? Pretty sure we can use ciphers here. Great, now you got both of us. You got both of us fucked up. What are you doing? Use a cipher. There's a fucking cipher. God. Cipher. Stress. Fucking rest. Oh, it sounds so nasal, right? It's not fucking thinking of all this shit. There's so many prerequisites we gotta do. Jesus. Oh god. Fucking hate totally could have made it work, but shit. No, we don't need it. Go home. Set the timer. There. Always gotta take a minute, right? Oh.
Te ves bien, my friend. You know where I am.
Do you go on? So, your idea of a good time. Take good care of it, Twitch. I thought this later, lover.
Okay. Spy. Go Octavia. Shouldn't be the worst. Or Titania. Let's assume Nourish. Impetus. Right. Could do Roar or Eclipse. You could do either. Let's see. I don't even think it'll let me use those. No, it let me use Nourish before. So, do I even... Fuck, what's that? Right there. No? Rainbow Flow for... Flow could work. Alright.
Navigation has been...
I'm a member of the Havasupai tribe. We are known as the Guardians of the Grand Canyon.
My name is
Bridal and Mola, Kazurai, Suda, Thailand, Halico, and Friend. Whatever damage time has done, we can undo.
that it will have an impact on
Let's
all
open this up.
future generations.
If you have
is
specimens,
the issue
I'm
of a
deeply
mine that is
interested.
being dug just right behind me.
My
Not
patience
too
is...
much further up this way at 305 is the turnoff to our sacred lands.
Right now, we're standing near sacred Red Butte, so this is the place of emergence for the Havasupai people.
Right now, there's uranium mining being done out there.
A new uranium mine is digging there against the tribe's wishes.
And local tribal leaders tell us they're concerned about what this means for the future.
I sit here as an elder at the moment, but this started many years ago.
Energy Fuels Inc. has tried to mine this site for decades.
The land that they're mining is very sacred to the Havasupai people. It was one of the places where the medicine were very powerful and grew there. They have desecrated that land.
Shut down Pinion Mine! Shut down Pinion Mine! Shut down Pinion Mine! Shut down Pinion Mine! Oh no! Oh no!
All of this land, they look at it and they only see shrubs, rocks. But all this is medicine. Some of the shrubs are medicine that we've used to help ourselves in sickness. The rocks are used for the sweats we do. The trees, they are used to keep us warm in the winter. A lot of these things are very important to us, but we're not looking at it that way. We're just always wanting money.
This is Andrew Callahan speaking. and I want to thank our correspondent, Juan, for getting this footage of the Pinyon Mine protest last week.
Best shit ever.
For context, Elder Diana, who's being interviewed, is a member of the Havasupai tribe, an extremely isolated indigenous community of about 750 people who live at the base of the Grand Canyon in Arizona.
I stand on sacred land, traditional, ancestral land, that is the place of gathering of medicines, the gathering of tradition, the gathering of ritual.
Speaking a dialect that belongs to the Yuman language family, it's more than likely they descend from the Delta Humans, or the Patayan peoples, a semi-nomadic group of farmers whose first documented trace dates back to the year 800, whereafter they discovered a massive freshwater aquifer beneath the surface of the Grand Canyon Plateau. And if you don't know what an aquifer is, it's pretty simple.
Spring waters that bubble up from the bottom of the ground.
These waters created Havasupai Creek, a tributary of the Colorado River, which flows into Havasu Falls, the lifeblood of the tribe's tourist economy and spiritual cornerstone of their ancestral economy.
The actual translation of Havasupai is people of the blue-green waters. Because of that waterfall in color.
In many ways, this tribe is not like many others. Despite their tribal lands being embedded in the most popular national park in the country that sees over 4.7 million visitors every year, the Havasupai have gone to great lengths to preserve their traditional way of living. In fact, they are the last remaining zip code in the U.S. who still receive their mail on horseback, and sometimes receive groceries by way of helicopter. They're also the only tribe in the U.S. who claim that 100% of its tribal members speak their native pre-colonial language.
I speak my language, the Havasupai language. In my language, we say, Hanikyo, it is good. Hanikyo, it is good. This is to bring the gratitude of all that is around us and to always prioritize that respect to divine source.
However, some tribal members among my age say it's becoming increasingly difficult to keep the language alive.
I myself speak Supai, you know. It took me a while. At first I was a little skeptical, a little nervous and everything else, but I've slowly noticed that people start to lose interest in our own language. I understand generations exposed to the culture from hip-hop, country, movies, Western, you know, it doesn't pique the interest of the younger generation. That's one of the things where I try to tell people to remain in their culture, like myself. As you can see, fancy dancer.
Though the tribe's territory encompasses over 295 square miles, it was once 6 times bigger, about the size of Delaware. That was until 1882, when President Chester declared the entire Canyon Plateau public land, ignoring the tribe's territory, and sanctioned the expansion of the Santa Fe Railroad system, ultimately building a new line from nearby affluent Flagstaff into the Grand Canyon Plateau, marketing the plateau as a lavish getaway for tourists during the later stages of westward expansion.
From this great
As the story goes, this brought forth European diseases like influenza and smallpox, and within 10 years, half of the Havasupai tribe passed away. Leaving only 116 tribal members remaining in 1906. 2 years later, in 1980, President Roosevelt declared the Grand Canyon a national monument, and for the next 2 years, the U.S. government gradually pushed the Havasupai people out of their lands, often raising their homes without warning, built log cabins in the area now known as Grand Canyon Village. In 1928, the Havasupai people were officially expelled from themselves. 50 years, from 1921 to 1975, they scattered, though mostly remained around northern Arizona, where they created small, cultural communities during the art and generation. Despite the unforeseen challenges of gambling addiction and family violence, the Havasupai remained 50 years to Congress with the sole singular demand of having their ancestral stolen land returned to them. Then in 1975, President Gerald Ford granted them a trust title to the Havasupai land, designating 175,000 acres of land as the Havasupai Reservation. And though it had been over 50 years, Havasupai elders and their descendants happily returned to ancestral land to restart.
We are all descendants of the people that originally lived here many thousands of years ago.
Since then, they've successfully tripled in size, and most importantly, established a booming tourism infrastructure, complete with a hotel, sweat lodge, ceremonies, hiking, mule rides, cafes, and a museum. If you want to support them, you can apply for reservations at their website, the official HaveASupaiTribe.com. However, after the restoration of their land, it wouldn't take too long for things to get dark again. It was discovered shortly after that beneath the HaveASupai lands was a shit ton of uranium. In fact, 1.6 million pounds of the highest grade uranium in North America, which is roughly worth $114 million. To clarify, this uranium was not specifically discovered under the Havasupai reservation, but in ancestral Havasupai territory, currently designated as the Kaibab National Forest.
It's not written by law, but by spirits.
However, the preservation of the Kaibab is crucial to their survival. Beneath the forest, and more specifically, beneath the Pinyon Plain mine, is the aquifer that provides the Havasupai tribe with all of its water.
The aquifer is right underneath that area, and the water, it gets contaminated. We're both underground, and it comes out right at the head of our village, and it's gonna make us sick. And this sickness is not the kind that you can just die right away. It's gonna go from generation to generation, deforming us mentally, physically. We're gonna have hardships with our breathing.
Let's talk specifically about the negative health effects of uranium. As we've learned in Hiroshima, Chernobyl, and Fukushima, uranium creates radioactive for up to 3,000 years. Also, radioactive dust, which flies off of the waste and the mines themselves, is carried by the wind and can easily contaminate nearby water supplies and crop fields. Exposure to this contamination can cause cancer, kidney failure, loss of reproductive function, birth defects in children, pretty much every other bad thing you can think of. Oh, let's also not forget necrotizing fasciitis, a condition we first observed on the streets of Philadelphia, interviewing users of a drug called Trank.
I wash, clean, put antibiotic fucking ointment on it, wrap it, everything. This has been here for 5 fucking months.
According to locals and Havasupai tribe members, the health effects are already being felt, and Pinyon Mine has just began operations.
You know, I've seen a lot of livestock lose their lives. I've actually been scared to drink water. I've been pretty much going into tap water, bottled waters and stuff myself because I've heard people have been getting sick and what we thought was clean water, being laid up in the hospitals for weeks at a time due to the contaminated waters.
They pierced one of the aquifers and it's been spewing out ever since. And the little animals are going in and drinking out the water or playing in the water, and they're getting contaminated.
Before we talk more about the negative health effects associated with uranium exposure, let's talk about why it's so valuable.
Yeah, and today it's uranium. The Senate passed this bill to ban enriched uranium imports from Russia, and President Biden is expected to sign it into law soon. It also unlocks $2.7 billion in funding.
First, it's the raw material primarily used as fuel for nuclear reactors that then produce electricity for the masses. And secondly, when uranium is enriched, it's used for defense weapons, like nuclear bombs. And also bulletproof tank armor and other armor-piercing projectiles. But most importantly, 41% of all the world's uranium is manufactured in the great nation of Kazakhstan, a former Soviet Union territory economically aligned with our sworn enemy, Mother Russia. So needless to say, the moment uranium was discovered beneath Havasupai land, the race began. The company running the Pinyon Mine is called Energy Fuels Incorporated.
My name is Mark Chalmers, and I'm president and CEO of Energy Fuels. We had a smashing 2023 with $100 million net income, so we're really excited about that, and we continue building into 2024.
Energy Fuels is a Canadian uranium company. They just recently started extraction on January 8th of this year, 2024, and this past week they started transporting uranium ore from here, from the mine back there, down to Interstate 40, and then from Interstate 40 on US 89 going up to the White Mesa Mill.
Congratulations to Energy Fuels on launching its new capacity to process rare earth elements at the White Mesa Mill in San Juan County.
Energy Fuels owns the mine and they own the mill. So the Havasupai people have been fighting the mine here.
We have to keep our atomic strength at top level by testing new ideas and principles. For these imprints answer questions that will lead our progress in weapon development and efficiency.
So all of these exposures, all of the death and contamination from the nuclear industry it's an ongoing thing that we live with every day. One of our co-founders from Hall No, Clebenali, the late Clebenali, called it a slow genocide. So it's not like the outright bombing and war that's happening in Palestine. It's happening here that the United States is funding and supporting and even promoting.
No uranium! No uranium! When do we want it? Now!
The way many tribal leaders see it, the construction of this mine is the ultimate betrayal. Here's why. For the past 20 years, the federal government has denied every permitting application Energy Fuels Inc. has submitted and became so determined to shut down any and all future mining in the Grand Canyon that President Biden actually passed prohibitive legislation in August of 2023.
The new designation will protect nearly 1 million acres around the national park from uranium mining.
He noted that in the past, the federal government has used various authorities against the interests of tribal communities. Take a listen to what the president said there.
The time some seek to ban books and bury history. We're making it clear that we can't just choose to learn only what we want to know.
Yet, somehow, someway, several months ago, Energy Fuels incorporated its permit. How? Well, it's simple.
A mining law that's over 150 years old has allowed a uranium mine to operate on these lands.
They evoked a law from 1872 called the General Mining Act, which declared that all public federal land could be mined by individuals and companies, so long as they had a sizable discovery of platinum, gold, silver, lead, zinc, or uranium beneath the surface. This law was passed at the far tail end of the gold rush to incentivize prospectors to head west and find fortune underground. For some perspective, during that time in history, most of the western states we know today were not actually states. They were territories, new incorporations of the American frontier. After the 1870s, the gold rush began, and so they didn't think to repeal or amend the 1872 Mining Act. Now here we are, 172 years later, and the law's being evoked by Energy Fuels Incorporated. But more importantly, it's being approved by the US government. Now, why would this be? Here's what they say.
I believe that it's important that taxpayers don't get shortchanged on revenue when it comes to resources on federal lands.
The fact that this mining law has been around since 1872 says something.
We must protect American workers, mining communities in the West, and our nation's competitiveness.
U.S. senators claim it has something to do with our entrepreneurial values as Americans,
as well as our pioneering spirit.
But the reality is much more straightforward. Energy Fuels Incorporated has an active business contract in place with the same organization that approved its permit, the U.S. government. In fact, they've promised to deliver our government 3 million pounds of domestically mined uranium by 2030 in order to establish something called the U.S. Strategic Uranium Reserve, which will serve as a nuclear energy backup in the event of a quote-unquote significant market disruption, and likely will be used to barter more equitable defense contracts with companies like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, who'll be able to circumnavigate corporate tax codes by buying uranium directly from the federal government.
At Lockheed Martin, we're on a mission. Your mission.
A lot of this mining that's happening is not going to be here in the United States. It's going to be taken across the ocean, become bombs.
Right now, it is August 5th.
Consuming huge
In
amounts of
Japan,
biotic.
it's August 6th.
Extracted before
Today is
Yarmouth
the day
can.
we bombed Japan. August 6th is the day the United States bombed Hiroshima. August 9th, we bombed Nagasaki. And that uranium came from indigenous lands in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We call it nuclear colonialism.
Despite these sorts of bold declarations made by protesters, the issue of nuclear energy is actually a very tricky one, because in terms of greenhouse gases and carbon emissions, nuclear is actually the safest and least damaging energy source for the environment, aside from solar. In fact, it's 88 times safer than coal, 65 times safer than oil, and twice as safe as wind. So the way progressive politicians see it, it appears that it's better for nuclear energy to combat climate change than safe.
Power plants in this country?
For those concerned about the effective of radioactive waste, it appears that the special interest groups representing manufacturers and transporters are alluded to violate federal laws to extract massive
Can we
quantities
kill these guys? Please?
A term that I was introduced to recently
Very simply put, we are now spending nations combined, the next 10 biggest countries, spending
200 people out here on the highway to demand that the government of Arizona shut down mining uranium mine. Right now,
Freaking try me! Target down.
Uranium no longer be shipped across Navajo tribal lands.
President Biden says the
They're super dead.
Temporary pause. We must continue to fight the mine until it's 100% shut down and completely closed, and remediation to the Havasu Tribe desire. What they want is what needs to happen.
Let's talk about it. We need that. Right now, the only to and from the mine is a group called Hallman, a direct action based out of the Navajo Nation.
I've been a part of fights. We've shut down the world's largest radioactive waste dump in New Mexico.
Time to clean house.
Shut down the mine. We can take some donations too, but the point is,
Even if you don't believe it, I think it's fair to say that this forensic case of perhaps that's why the two-party political change.
Are we gonna have a problem?
supply the consumption that we have for electricity. We need to reduce our consumption. Uranium, nuclear is not going to save us. It's not carbon-free. They only count the carbon footprint at the nuclear power plant. They don't count everything before, and they don't count everything after. And that waste is going to be radioactive pretty much forever.
Before I leave you all, here is a message from the club that he asked us to share with the audience.
What is beneath the ground and what is above the ground. There was very specific gifting from divine source. What is beneath is meant to give that strength and empowerment to those that are on the above. For those of us that are on the above, watch and see, hear and feel.
Got it.
And know that what we see beneath us and around us are given the opportunity to
Seriously?
is what is happening right now. To desecrate the Mother Earth in digging
out of my face!
Survival of all people.
Because once it goes through our canyon room, it goes right down all the way to the townships in down the river. So it's going to hurt us. Like I said, my people,
It is not just white. It is not just red. It is not just yellow. It is not just black. But it is all. We do not exist on this mother earth as an really the
Okay, let's do this.
was to protect it, for it provided the food.
Oh, man.
You are here today simply because of your ancestors. Therefore, honor that and know that before you, generation, and we too must stand
This video is sponsored by Nebula. Please stay tuned to the end of the video to find out more about how you can sign up for Nebula so you can see my new short film talking to white people, which will only be available on Nebula. Now on to the show. After writing Donald Trump
to get irradiated?
his second term as president of the United States, and in many ways, he's been exactly what I and others feared he might be, and in some ways, much worse. It was expected that Trump would do petty and ridiculous things like pardoning the perpetrators of the January 6th uprising, or doing a full-on commercial for Tesla at the White House, renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, and so on. But he's also done things that are more demonstrably harmful, such as cutting tons of jobs within the federal government. I know many people who are out of work right now because of cuts to federal jobs. He's also killed DEI programs in various places. His tariff war stuff has caused many problems with the economy. He has declared that there are only two genders. He's put incompetent and dangerous people in charge of important American government systems like education and health, with the vaccine denier / weirdo RFK and long-standing stooge Linda McMahon being over education. And that's even if he keeps the Department of Education, which it sounds like they're trying to get rid of. And then there's the intangibles. There's the emboldening of white supremacists across the country doing marches in major cities. Ben Shapiro is calling for the pardoning of Derek Chauvin, the man who murdered George Floyd. Other American corporations are following suit with the retreat of DEI and equity programs, which, although never really a good thing, were at least ostensibly supposed to serve underserved populations, most notably at Target, which has kicked off some kerfuffle among black folks and probably a litany of other things I can't think of. And I don't know if all of this is perfectly accurate, because to be honest, I haven't been paying attention to this motherfucker. I told y'all that a couple of months ago, that I really am not here to talk about Trump. This will not be a Trump coverage channel. It's not that I don't care, it's that I don't think talking about all the bad shit he does is all that useful, at least for me. But I'll probably come back to that in a second. What this video is a reassessment of some things I said and mentioned in a video I did not long after the election about how Trump got here in the first place, about why he is our president today, at least according to the explicit election results of 2024. That video had a really interesting response in that it was something that I think most people appreciated, but some people appreciated in ways that I didn't like and don't stand behind, and other people hated it for reasons I don't think make a lot of sense and have been trying to prove to me otherwise this entire time. In that video, I essentially say that the core issues that caused Donald Trump to win that election, no matter how you try to analyze or swing it, mostly come down to race. My argument is that issues like Palestine had minimal effect on the poor performance of Kamala Harris in the general election, and that her performance and loss had more to do with her identity and how people perceive her identity than anything else she did or anything else Trump did that at least was related to her or the presidency, as opposed to like people just wanting Trump to be in office and piss off the woke mob and get rid of immigrants, etc. I said this in that video and I'll say it again here. This does not mean that other issues are irrelevant to why this election ended the way it did. It just means that from my perspective, based on the analysis I did, maybe less on the fact that Kamala was a black woman, and just taking a look at the trends of the voter data over the last couple elections, exit polls, and everything else, and saying what I think it meant. Please go back to that video if you want to see my actual analysis, or don't. I know for some of you, it will not matter. One thing I've learned after years on this platform is that your loudest and most visible critics and people that understand you the least rarely ever actually pay attention to you. Any issue that they have with you is rarely a position you actually hold or take that you've actually given. Instead, they'll often hyper-focus on a distorted, made-up version of something they heard you might have said that they got from something somebody else said that they read on Twitter. And it's always people with a whole lot of tweets. Just keep it real. Y'all niggas tweet a lot. My point is, I'm not going to relitigate everything from that video. I watched it, and close your ears with those of you who hate me because you think I'm smug and arrogant. That video was a banger. I cooked on that shit. This is the double dip. I'm sorry. Are there elements and angles from that video that I hope are elaborated on by other people? Definitely. Are there ways in which I could have been more clear and I want to clarify a little bit here? Of course I wouldn't be making this video, but I think the core thesis I had to that video has not been disproven by anything that I've seen, but I do want to at least engage with some of the most significant criticisms that I caught from that and update how I feel about this whole situation at this point some months later. So let's get to major criticism 1. New research seems to indicate that the genocide in Palestine was in fact a major factor in voter opinions and the outcome of this election. In late January, right around the inauguration, the Institute for Middle Eastern Understanding released a report that found that nearly 30% of former Biden voters that didn't vote for Kamala Harris didn't do that mainly because of Palestine. Press releases about this report circled strongly in left-wing online circles. More than a few people sent this to me or added me about this on Twitter as proof that I was wrong. And it is secretly vindication on the idea that it was in fact the genocide in Palestine that caused Kamala Harris to lose. So let's talk about this. As I mentioned in previous videos, I have legitimate credentials and experience in sociological research. And when you're a trained researcher, you know that one of the worst things you can do to actually care about whatever research happened is only read the press release, because a press release is very different than an actual study. They don't have nearly the same level of oversight or scrutiny, and one has way more leeway to say whatever the fuck it wants without getting licenses revoked or sued or whatever. When I see headlines like, damning new poll shows price Kamala Harris paid for backing Israeli genocide in Gaza, I know that they don't have to go through a very rigorous evaluation process to make that statement. They'll just say in the article, according to research done by such and such, and then post a link to that research, knowing that most people will click it and never actually look at the research directly. Instead, people will just link the article on a tweet and then use it in their preferred culture or topic. They probably won't even actually read the article either if the headline is provocative enough and says the thing that they want to be true. I remember a few years ago, a whole young men are becoming more right-wing table popped up in social media circles, and a bunch of people talk about it, went nuts, and had this one graph to show this big trajectory of right-wing thinking with these men. And don't get me wrong, some elements of the election do show that to be kind of a thing, but it's not nearly as much of a thing as the research showed it. I made a whole video about it on the B-side years ago. I guess I'll leave that in the description, although it has nothing to do here, except for point out the fact that when it comes to research that enters into the pop culture, social media discourse space, it's almost always being represented to me more than what it actually does me. And this paper is no exception. The methods section of this paper immediately bothered me because I'm not sure it's really a methods section or a research paper, at least from what I'm seeing. And I know different papers have different standards, and it might be something that I just have not been able to find, but that's a problem. If you're publishing research, I should be able to easily read the entirety of the paper, even if I have to pay for access to a journal, but that's neither here nor there. It says the data was collected from YouGov.org, which is not a horrible thing, that's perfectly fine. But I immediately had a red flag when I looked at this first piece, which showed the people that voted for Biden but not Kamala Harris, and its sample size was only 604. So 604 is not a horrible sample size for sociological research, but it's not really big enough to be what we call representative in political research. So this is like all very brief, oversimplified research methodology stuff. Like, please, for those of you who are still hardcore into the sociological research space, do not come check me on this. Just roll with it unless I say something really fucked up, then drag me in the comments. But you know where I'm going with this. It's never possible to survey everyone on a given issue. You can't look at everyone's grades across the country for a particular test or look at everyone's health outcomes or whatever. It's just not possible. So in quantitative research, i.e. statistical research, statisticians have come up with a bunch of different standards and formulas and rules that basically say, okay, if you follow these rules, your sample of people will be what we call representative, i.e. this means that whatever you find in this research is representative of the greater population around this issue.
Well, this
through the
situation,
power of
relax.
statistics, we can say
I've
that
got
whatever
this.
you found,
Is
shit is
this
cool.
essential?
Shit worked. It's predictable. This is imperfect on a lot of levels. Papers that seem like they're good in 1999 were proven to be some bullshit in 2003 and so on and so forth. But it is a general standard and how things are done. In political research, even on YouGov.org, the expectation is that a political survey should have at least 1,000 valid responses. Yet,
Wondrous
I didn't see
escapade.
anything about them not reaching that threshold in this report, which initially made me very suspicious about the whole thing. And I kept digging and clicking around and realized, I had missed low-key half of the paper, and I went back and looked and saw that the entirety of the sample was not 604, it was actually 1,078 voters. The other 474 respondents in the sample actually still voted for Kamala Harris, despite her stance on sending weapons to Israel. So I want you to think about the real math here now. This survey had a valid sample size of 1,078 people. Of those 1,078 people, 604 or 56% of them did not vote for Kamala Harris. And then, by their own words, only 175 out of those 604 people did not vote for Kamala Harris, primarily because of the fact that she did not take a stance against the genocide in Palestine. When we put that back into the context of the entire sample, what these reports really should point out is that only 16% of the people that they surveyed did not vote for Kamala Harris because of Palestine, which is significant but far less compelling than the initial things that were being put out there. It's literally...
I'm gonna come back later, y'all. Gotta head to the doctors in a bit. So, yeah. Have a good rest of your day. Good rest of your day.